Welcome everybody. We're just having people starting to join now to our second Open Doors webinar on trauma-informed boards for women's shelters and transition houses. I'll just give a quick orientation. Everyone who's an attendee should have a dashboard where they can write questions. Because we're going to have quite a few participants, I'm going to keep all the participant microphones muted so that we'll only be able to hear the voices of the presenters. But there's a question area on the side that you can type in your answers, and then I'll read them out loud. We'll get through as many as we can in the time that we have after the presentation. So you can put in your questions anytime, and then I'll get to them in order. And if there's some that are really similar or duplicates, then we'll sort of merge those together, and hopefully get to everybody's question if we have enough time. I am recording this session, so once it's over, if there are people in your organization that you'd like to share it with afterwards, please do. In a few days, I'll be able to get it. You'll have the link sent to you automatically through GoToWebinar as a participant, and then you can. I'm not sure if you can share that if you need to be logged in, but shortly after that, we're going to get it up onto our own YouTube channel, and it'll be linked through our website and through the opendoorsproject.ca website as well. So we're excited about that. That's what we did for our very first webinar, which was a great success. We had really good numbers for that. Really interesting topic on prescription medication and medicinal marijuana in women's shelters and transition houses. So I think that was a really great learning opportunity, and it's still there as a resource for anyone who needs to have a look at that and learn a bit from what some other shelters are doing and from what a leading legal expert has to say on the history and the trajectory of that. Of course, a lot of things have happened since then, and it's definitely a moving target. So hopefully we'll have a follow-up sometime in the future. I think we've got a good chunk of the people that we're expecting here now. So I'll do an initial introduction to our two presenters. I'm very pleased to have with us from Rowan House, Alberta, Sherrie Botten and Tulloch, and I'll just let you each introduce yourselves quickly to our participants. So Sherrie?
Hello. Hello, I am Sherrie Botten, as Heather said, and I'm the Executive Director of Rowan House Society in High River, which is in southern Alberta, just south of Calgary.
Thank you.
And hi, my name is Tulloch. I'm the board chair of the Rowan House Society and have been privileged and excited to be a part of the journey of implementing trauma-informed practices at the board level, making it part of our organization at all levels.
Fantastic. So one thing I'll just throw up right now is I've made two little really simple polls, and just one of them is to find out who our participants are, so just a sense of what role you have. So I'm going to launch that poll right now. It should come up in a tiny little spot on the side for you, and so people can start filling that out. So it'll just give you a sense of give me a sense of how many executive directors versus board members versus other management and frontline staff. So that's coming up now. It's so fun to watch that get filled out live during the webinar, and it does give me a sense of who we're speaking with. So right now we're mostly executive directors, but about 50-50, and then the rest is a split between board members, other management, a small amount of frontline staff, and then some other as well. So I'm curious who those others are. Will maybe identify themselves in the questions. Maybe from other programs or funders, or from the provincial associations, maybe. That would be fantastic. You're all very welcome, and I hope that you learn a lot. So I have another poll that I'll pull up later, but right now I know that there's still some numbers coming up, and if people join us later, that's fine. But I'm going to go ahead and start my slideshow for now, which is sort of an introduction to the program of Open Doors, and we'll go from there. So just going to make sure that I am the presenter. Hey, where's my screen? Okay, so my screen sharing attendee still on hold. Only staff. What? Oh, my broadcast. Hello, everyone. So I'm just going to start my slideshow here now. We're getting started. I'm just going to click start and that should go. I'm still collecting responses from the poll, so that's great. Here we go. I'm going to close the poll so that I can start doing my screen sharing because that is a conflict there. So sorry about that. Closing that. And thank you all for your responses. All right, now I can bring up my slideshow. Sorry about that. There's always some little tiny glitch along the way. So here we are. And let me just hide that. So trauma-informed boards for women's shelters. This is going to be about 5 to 10 minutes. I'm going to try to whip through it as quickly as I can. Introducing the Open Doors project, briefly defining trauma, and then reviewing the role of the boards before we pass the table to Sherrie and Chris. So Open Doors is a 3-year project. It's actually a YWCA Canada project, and it's promoting more trauma-informed and inclusive perspectives and practices within shelters and transition houses around substance use and mental health. And so we're about halfway through that project right now. And it's in a partnership between YWCA, BC Society of Transition Houses, which developed the training, and Canadian Women Foundations, and ourselves, Women's Shelters Canada. So we've done the first 3 of 6 trainings, and then next week I'm going to Yukon, to Yellowknife, pardon me, in Northwest Territories, and Yukon will be shelters from Yukon will be joining us there. So that'll be our 4th, and yeah, it's really coming along. So we're teaching ways of reducing barriers, and it's a lot of information sharing between the participants as well. Northwest Territories, Quebec, and Nunavut are the ones that are remaining. And then we've got the website opendoorsproject.ca, and which has a lot of resources. So if any of you are curious about more resources, all of the teaching and train the trainer resources are up there on that site. So even if you weren't one of the lucky selectees for those live workshops, you can still benefit from those great resources online. So what is trauma? Trauma is a sum of the event, the experiences, and the effect. So the event is the situation that happens, the experience is how it's perceived by the person involved, and then the effect is the sort of longer term effects, the impact that has on that person's body and life and behaviors in terms of survival mechanisms. So trauma is the situation that causes trauma and the outcomes of that. A trauma-informed approach is understanding and being aware, focusing on survivor safety. Trauma-specific is clinical. So not all women's shelters and transition houses will have a clinical intervention level, but the goal is for more shelters to have a trauma-informed approach. And a lot of this has been intuitively adapted by women's shelters and transition houses from the get-go. So it's sort of there's a lot of harmonizing and just affirmation that some of the things that have always been done have always been trauma informed, but there's also new learning and new things that can be incorporated as well. Yeah, so trauma-informed services replace top-down approaches. It's more women-guided and lets women choose their own direction from where they are. From strength-based, inclusive, and anti-oppressive perspectives. So this is pretty standard feminist work. So it really fits in with the feminist approach that people have been taking. It just sometimes there's extra steps that are added to that to reduce some rules and to really address the substance use and mental health impacts of trauma in a more direct way. So this has in the past been a serious barrier to accessing VIW. Dry shelters or shelters that are less open to accommodating mental health concerns have in the past turned women away, and that has been a challenge that a lot of shelters are now looking to redress. And Open Doors is looking to address that gray area, help provide some tools for staff to problem solve, to help women address their safety and needs, and to make a shift in organizational culture. So a board has a huge role to play in that. The board has a huge influence on organizational culture. So the board will, a good board would possess and develop personal insight into the experience of multiple communities. So not just from one community of privilege, but really have that broad insight. They would nurture a shared awareness of the impact of trauma and commit to inclusive service. They would work supportively with staff to address challenges and concerns, and they would understand and address the impact of trauma on staff and board members as well. So I'm just going to try to adjust. There we go. Well, try to see my notes here. Okay. So there's 4 types of boards: advisory, nonprofit, private, and public corporate. And this slideshow is linked, so you can read more about it later. But essentially, we're all talking about nonprofit boards here. So the board members are typically uncompensated, and directors may also be expected to donate or fundraise and are motivated by a desire to support a cause. Nonprofit boards as a whole tend to be larger, more connected to the field, more altruistically motivated, so motivated by the cause, more female in general, and particularly in the women's shelter sector, and slightly less racially diverse than corporate boards, which is a bit surprising, but that was what one recent study found in Canada. And a recent study of over 200 Canadian nonprofits showed that over 90% of board chairs and executive directors hired by boards are white, which is a bit surprising as well, but something to keep in mind. So ideally, the demographics of a board would reflect the demographics of the people served by the shelter or transition house. Most shelters aren't there yet, and so that's an area that can really help with understanding trauma, because trauma is is intersectional. So so elements that can be reflected in the board include mental health, race, disability, gender identity, and orientation. So most nonprofit boards don't do this, and partly it's because of the labor load that is included in being a board member. People with more privilege tend to also have more ability to they have more extra labor that they can contribute, and so so there's that dynamic involved as well. But creating more space and support for a really diverse board can really increase the knowledge and the direct experience and understanding of trauma that different communities possess. And Maytree, which is a Canadian foundation, has developed a bilingual diversity and governance toolkit for Canadian nonprofits that can help with ongoing recruitment. So it's not a one-off deal. It's an ongoing recruitment process that all boards can take part in, and can really, it's one piece of trauma. So it's not the be-all and end-all, but it's certainly a piece that contributes and is important. And then the other piece is sort of the culture piece that where boards can really set a direction. So boards have 3 main roles. The first is governance, which is sort of the cut and dry legal functions of managing, hiring, and financial review, which is very, very important. And women's shelters and transition houses would not be able to do what they do legally without this really important role. So that's sort of the foundation and the ground of what boards do. But boards also have 2 other important roles. There's the interpretive role of how boards create and manage meaning by shaping the shared understandings in terms of reference. So a lot of values and principles are brought into play here that are then transformed into practices and outcomes. So this is a huge important role that boards play. And then finally, the political roles, recognizing the roles of board in allocation of power, influence, and responsibility as the organization grows. So that's both the ability of the board to challenge power outside of the women's shelter and transition house, so challenging structures and structural power that contributes to racism and trauma, intergenerational trauma, all of patriarchy, and violence, and all those pieces that are really important for a board to address. And then also the power structures within the organization as well. So looking at how that can be more supportive and more empowering for everybody. So, and elements of workplace culture, which I think will really come out, probably we'll hear some of these echoed in the conversation that Sherrie and Chris bring, is how does the work get done, how do decisions get made, and how does communication work between and among workplace units. So, and this can ultimately contribute to increased outcomes for residents and for women that use women's shelters, but also staff resilience. So when things are working well and communication is flowing well and the staff culture is strong, then staff resilience will be stronger as well. Stress and burnout will be lowest when programs are working and outcomes are positive for the women being supported. So this is a huge role that boards play in sort of setting that tone and really working towards that supportive, responsive organizational culture, which is hugely important, especially when an organization is going through a big shift that can be a lot of change, and change is always stressful. So a board really is sort of steering that and being responsive and trying to find that harmony within the chaos of change. So it's a big role. It's a lot to manage. And really right now, there's when I was doing this research, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's very little that is out there right now that really builds a strong link between trauma-informed approach and an analysis of board roles and responsibilities. So I was just sort of cobbling those together, and I think it gets our mind going, but really this workshop and the conversations that we're about to have are really going to be taking that conversation to the next level. So with no further ado, I am very excited to pull up my screen again and show my webcams again. And here we go. And pass the table to Sherrie. So thank you so much. And I'm just going to switch over to Sherrie now. Yes. All right. Thank you so much, Sherrie.
There. Now, I can't tell if my screen is showing, but I think it is, right?
It is. It looks perfect.
Perfect, perfect. Hello, everyone, again. My name is Sherrie Botten, and I'm the Executive Director of Rowan House Society, which operates Rowan House Emergency Shelter, which is located in High River, Alberta, which is in southern Alberta, south of Calgary. And Chris, would you like to introduce yourself again?
Sure, I'm Chris Tulloch. I'm the board chair of Rowan House Society, and excited to be here to talk about trauma-informed services at the board level. We've had a 3-year journey, and very happy to share what we've learned.
Great, fantastic. I'm also thrilled that we can do this nationwide. So we're in 3 different locations, and we're hoping everything works well. And now I am not able to see my screens of people, so I'm going to carry on and going to go through a bit of our journey. And we want to do that fairly quickly so we can get to the point where we can really talk about the things that worked well and the things that maybe we tweak a bit and might help you as you're starting your journey. So we will be sharing our journey to become trauma-informed as an organization. We'll talk about the importance of having the board committed to this process while still able to deal with the impact of the changes that need to occur. So trauma-informed care and practice, and Heather's already gone through a lot of this. It's a strength-based framework. It's grounded in an understanding of and responsiveness to the impact of trauma. It emphasizes physical, psychological, emotional safety for both providers and survivors. And that's an important part because we're talking about 2 parts of or 2 sides of the coin here. And it creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. That is really what trauma-informed care is about in a nice little succinct statement. Rowan House has had a shelter supporting women fleeing domestic violence since the year 2000. Our journey into trauma-informed care really started when we moved into a new, larger facility in High River, Alberta. Then, 11 months later, we were hit by a devastating flood that was one of the worst natural disasters to hit Alberta. So with our plan to rebuild the facility, support the staff and the program, we looked to trauma-informed practice to get us through. Not only did we have a physical shelter and clients that were impacted by this natural disaster, we had a staff operating the shelter and nurturing women and children fleeing violence who personally were impacted and experiencing their own trauma due to this disaster. We knew both past and current trauma would impact our work with women coming to the shelter for services, so we started to look at all aspects of our agency through a trauma lens, constantly keeping in mind how traumatic experiences impact consumers of our programs. Developing trauma-informed services is considered a best practice approach. Offering trauma-informed services recognizes the pervasiveness of trauma and its impacts on a survivor's ability to cope, to access services, and to feel safe in a new setting. Programs that are informed by an understanding of trauma respond best to consumer needs and avoid engaging in re-traumatizing practices. In domestic violence services, many women and children have experienced multiple and complex traumatic events, in addition to the trauma associated with domestic violence itself. Trauma-informed services specifically avoid re-traumatizing both those who seek their services and those who are on the staff. Trauma-informed services put safety first and commit to do no harm. This knowledge is the foundation of an organizational culture of trauma-informed care. A trauma-based approach primarily views the individual as having been harmed by something or someone. We changed our view from what's wrong with you to what's happened to you. Trauma-informed requires a real paradigm shift in service delivery culture. It involves not only changing assumptions about how we organize and provide services, but must create organizational cultures that are personal, holistic, creative, open, therapeutic. We think about how common trauma is. We think about its impact, how it can be central to one's development. We think about the wide range of adaptations people make to cope and survive. The relationship of trauma with other issues such as substance abuse, physical health, and mental health concerns is really important. We knew we had to support women in understanding the connections between their past trauma and their current strategies for coping. We wanted to ensure women had choices and control over their options. We wanted to share power, decrease hierarchy, and build trust. We embrace these 5 core values of trauma-informed care: safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment. So we talked about, are we ensuring emotional and physical safety? Are we clear and consistent with our policies, honest with service users, and maintain program-appropriate boundaries? Do our activities offer service users choice and control? Do we use a collaborative approach with clients instead of a top-down hierarchical model? Do we offer self-esteem and skill building in what we do? While an organization may value the principles of trauma-informed service delivery, such as these core values, it can be difficult to transform these concepts into specific practices that align with all levels of an organization. It was important to explore what these 5 trauma-informed core values looked like and mean to each of Rowan House's programs and the administration. We explored this with staff and with board. We knew it was best practice to be trauma-informed. This is where we wanted to go. We made a decision early on that this is to be bigger than just tools and techniques. We wanted a trauma-informed service delivery model that was a part of everything we did, from frontline to board involvement in the community. We began by introducing trauma theory and practice techniques to frontline staff. At the same time, we were working with a larger organization, including the board, to allow for an all-agency buy-in. We used a tool from the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health that identified 7 focus areas to review. We asked these questions as we went through all 7 of these focus areas. What are we doing well in each one? What can we do better? And we built on what we were already doing well. It was messy at times and never a straight linear process. We hopped around and we worked in all 7 areas at once. When we looked at Organizational commitment. The board itself, the board as a whole, took a thorough look at our mission and vision to ensure we had a commitment to providing culturally relevant and inclusive programs and practices. We updated all of our policies, our board, operational, and personal policies to ensure we were clear in this commitment to the families we were serving. We considered culture and asked questions like, is Rowan House accessible to everyone? Do Rowan House materials, decor, and other physical aspects reflect the diversity of the women and children being served? What does Rowan House do well to make sure that the space is welcoming, inclusive, and accessible to people receiving services and also to our staff members? What does Rowan House do well to reduce or minimize potential triggers? What can we do to improve? We adapted our screening and intake procedures so that women are not required to disclose trauma history before they're ready, nor have to repeatedly retell their stories. We now recognize the range of emotional responses and symptoms that women may experience and view these as symptoms or adaptations to difficult life experiences rather than problem behaviors. We now facilitate the learning of coping strategies, healing, and empowerment. Rowan House policies express a commitment to trauma-informed principles for shelter clients and staff. They reflect a commitment to avoid re-traumatization and promoting healing and recovery. Staff members are supported in their work with survivors through supervision, self-care, and wellness strategies. Self-care and the cost of it is supported in the board budget. This was really, really important. There's an understanding of compassion, fatigue, and vicarious trauma. Staff support is something that really needs the board to buy into this because there's a cost to it. We wanted to ensure other systems in the community are aware of how we integrate trauma-informed practice into our programs. So we looked at our external relationships and how we collaborate with others in the community. We're also aware of who in the community provides services in a way similar to ours. And if we know a service is not fully trauma-informed in their practice, we support our clients as they navigate those systems. Valuation and gathering of feedback, the process is ongoing. We're continually checking in that new staff are trained and understand the reasoning for our move to trauma-informed practice. We bring trauma-informed practice into everything we do, and we're always looking for ways to improve and deepen our understanding of the impact of trauma. It was important to get and keep the board involved. The board's support was paramount in our success. Chris, do you want to speak a bit about that? I know I went through the trauma-informed process very, very quickly, but I know we want to talk about how we were able to do it on the ground.
Sure, thank you, Sherrie. I just want to bring out a couple of points that will maybe help some of our listeners understand what trauma-informed actually means to a board, because when I first heard about trauma-informed practice, it made absolute perfect sense to the service delivery, but I didn't understand what it meant for a board. I now embrace this as a key part, it's the core of everything that we do at the board level, and I want to explain a little bit about that. When we really understand those core values, when we really understand the organizational culture that comes along with trauma-informed practice, I found the original slideshow that Sherrie provided when we did the very first trauma-informed practice, and it talks about we're creating an organizational culture that is personal, holistic, creative, open, and therapeutic, and that describes the culture that we're trying to build actually within the board as well. We're trying to reflect the organizational culture inside the board. So when we embrace those values, when we own those values as a board as a whole and as an individual board member, we connect with the organization in a powerful way that just didn't happen before. So it doesn't just inform our choices, it doesn't just inform our strategic direction. It really makes us a more effective board because we embrace safety as a key value within the board. So the board's meetings are a safe place where people can take risks because they trust each other. Trustworthiness, again, is a key value, right? So it's not just, okay, do we have policies? Do we have our methods and procedures for delivering services? It really is an embracing and a personal and collective ownership of those values that we've managed to embed, I think, into our board culture as well as an organizational culture.
I can add one little thing there, because I think Chris was talking about everything, how the board was so involved. And I heard board members say they saw the excitement of staff. And I thought, well, that's very cool. So staff were excited, but for the board to see that, so they saw the excitement of staff because, as Chris said, it's a governance board. They're not on the ground doing the work. So they saw the excitement of staff, but they also saw the impact on clients. So as board members are coming and going for meetings or whatever, so they're starting to see the impact on clients. They're hearing about the impact on clients. They understood the importance of staff support and self-care. That's really, really important, because it's tough to do this without the support of the board. It really is. I think we tried to keep them involved and excited in every step. So hopefully that helped. I don't know how that happened, but this board was really committed to looking at what we were doing. So I don't know if that helped at all, Chris.
And if you remember, Sherrie, we immediately after, or the board meeting after we did the trauma-informed practice, we actually formally asked the question, is this something that we believe is valuable for Rowan House Society? And the answer was an overwhelming yes. It truly changed how we governed Rowan House Society.
It was powerful for staff to see as well that the little exercise, we called it a quilt exercise, where we took each of those core values and talked about what that meant for each program. So the child support program would have done their core values. The frontline staff in shelter did, but board did as well. So they talked about, what does safety mean at the board level? Well, Chris, you've mentioned about that. What does choice mean?
Sorry. One of the questions asked was, from your perspective as a Rowan House Society Board of Directors, what is it like when you are practicing those 5 values in the board? So again, collective and individual responsibility.
Good. I'm just going to jump in and say, you know, we'll have an ongoing conversation between Chris and Sherrie, and at some point, as people start to ask questions, then we'll sort of incorporate some of those questions in as we go. So everyone who's a participant should see there should be a question slot somewhere on your dashboard there that you can write in questions, and I'll answer them as I go for those who came in sort of after I gave that spiel the first time. I'm also going to quickly pop up a second poll, which you can answer sort of quickly, and just to give a sense of how many of you are sort of in the early processes of considering working with your board to make a trauma-informed organization. How many of you are in progress, and how many of you are operating under those values and that approach already? So, and I think that's good, and I'll pass the floor back to Chris and Sherrie. Thank you. So right now it looks like about 70% are under consideration. So that's a lot.
Okay, I don't have my screen, so if questions come up, you're going to share them for us.
Yes, that'll be me. Yeah.
Okay. And we could keep talking about this for a long time. I'm really excited to hear some questions, and people ask, well, how did that work? For us, and we started in small pieces, so I can share one little bit. Everything that we do at Rowan House, we start every meeting, every time we gather, every staff meeting with a round of gratitude. And I thought that this was really important for that to happen at the board level as well, although I was a little nervous. I did talk to Chris, said, what do you think? And Chris said, of course, that makes perfect sense. We should be doing the same thing. So for the past 2.5 years, every one of our board meetings starts with a round of gratitude as well. So it is pretty powerful when I talk with staff, or when we talk out in the community, we talk about how our trauma-informed practices are woven through everything we do, and to be able to say that at a board level, this is equally important.
Yeah, the first AGM that we held after we adopted trauma informed, if you remember, Sherrie, we had a couple of staff come and do a presentation, and one of them approached me afterwards about how excited she was that we started the AGM with a round of gratitude, because it really proved to her that we weren't just talking the talk, we were walking the walk. We actually were living the trauma-informed principles. I thought was very powerful too.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I'm sure some people must want to know some in-depth stuff about how it felt at the board level.
Well, I'm curious about that. I'm curious about, you're talking about sort of the final outcome, but what were things like before? What were some elements that you practical elements that you had to change in terms of how you operated as a board and as an organization?
Chris, do you want me to speak a bit about it, and then you can kind of jump in and talk about it as well? There was a lot of things. It really is how we looked at everyone coming to us, rather than speak about someone perhaps with, I don't know how to really articulate this, but really looking at people's coping mechanisms as exactly that. They may be unhealthy coping mechanisms, but they were coping mechanisms, and now it's our task to help them learn some healthier ways of dealing with things. And this was almost like kind of a freeing way of thinking of things. And I think it was also at the board level as well, where we can talk about, we're not seeing people coming to us that are hurt and damaged. Of course they're hurt and damaged, but they've gotten here. And every woman that walks in the door of the shelter has gotten here, and that's something to be shared as a positive. So we really started looking at things a little bit different, and I believe the board did as well. Chris, would you say that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me talk personally here. I have been able to use the things I've learned through our trauma-informed journey to help me manage the board, recognizing that people's behavior under stressful situations may seem a little odd sometimes, but again, people have arrived at the board via their own journey, and things have happened to them that are causing them to have maybe a visceral response to certain stimuli. And it's changed my response to people behaving in ways maybe that I didn't appreciate. If there's a display of anger at the board, for example, my response is no longer going to be, well, you're wrong. It's going to be, okay, let me understand why you're angry. What was the trigger? It has really changed how we approach discussions in the board, how we approach each other, how we trust each other. It's such a multifaceted thing. I'm not sure how to describe the whole the whole impact on how we handle the board and discussions and decisions, especially.
And I can share one part, because often it does come up at a board level, and maybe it's not quite the right language, but it works for us. Is this really trauma informed? How would we deal with this? And so everyone is asking that. It very much is not a top-down organization in that way, even at the board table. So Chris, being chair, is always looking for the input of others, and I'm sure many boards are doing that anyway. So there's so many things that people are doing already, whether at the front line or even within the organization or at the board level. So this is just adding on to that.
So let's have a real-world, very recent example. We heard at our board meeting on Monday evening that there had been a fentanyl-related incident at an Alberta shelter. And we were told about what the emergency response was, with the hazmat team in full suits coming into the building and sealing things off. And my immediate reaction was, how on earth do you have people walking through a shelter in a hazmat suit without re-traumatizing people? It's a trauma-informed response, right? And it was immediate. And I think probably most of my board colleagues had the same reaction. So again, it's changed the way we respond to the challenges we face as a board. So when we're thinking about emergency response, and I do want to, by the way, Sherrie, have a look at our response to some of the critical events. How do we make sure that we're maintaining our trauma-informed approach under difficult circumstances like that?
Just to pop in, I see one question. It was just whether we can get a copy of the PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint that I presented very quickly is already up as a handout. Would it be possible to share the Rowan House PowerPoint?
Yes, definitely.
Fantastic. So I'll get that to all of the participants after we're done.
Okay. Can I add a bit, if there's no other question, because maybe this will spur some, that response. So when Chris is talking about that, how in the world can we be trauma informed? We had a situation even within the shelter where many people are traumatized by loud sounds. So we are a communal living residential facility. So we do have fire alarms, we have fire drills. So discussion around whether it's a hazmat team walking through the shelter or it's a very loud, intense fire alarm. How can we be trauma informed? We're going to have to turn that down. We're going to have to make sure the guys in the hazmat suits don't come into the shelter. Well, that's not true. There's certain things that still are our mandate. So you can still be very trauma informed in your response to things when you have certain things that you must do. The kind of the simple answer to that is letting people know what's going on. So letting people know that what our fire drill is going to look like. Some people can know when it's going to happen, even though we don't want the majority of people to know. But if you know someone that you know one of either a client, or in our case residents, or a staff will be triggered by that loud sound, it's letting them know when this is going to happen and strategizing around what that might mean to them. Could a staff member come and be by their side? If they're so triggered by that, we will arrange for them to not be in the shelter at that time. So again, there's ways of doing that with something happening like the fentanyl scare or any drug scare or any, I hate to say it, apprehension of children or anything like that. It's just important to be able to talk about that and let people know. So it's an understanding that you would have of both the people that are receiving services at our shelter as well as staff. So understanding staff, because many staff come with, well, we've already talked about the prevalence of trauma. So it's just being able to talk about that, have an understanding of that, and be able to talk about how to best help that person to not be triggered by a situation.
I have a question about the sort of lines of communication and the process of decision making and team sort of consultation. So from the conversations I've had with women's shelters who have adopted this practice and or are in the process of adopting these practices, they often find they have to change the way that staff and team work together so that they can solve problems that are a little bit in the gray area around substance use or conflict resolution around mental health and things like that. So have you done anything about sort of the line of decision making or consultation or how people can check in with their colleagues or their supervisors or the board when difficult decisions need to happen on the fly that are related to trauma-informed practice?
Yes, I can speak to that first. From an operational level, we're a very flat organization anyway, so there's lots of consultation, lots of talk and discussion around what should happen. We have lots of ongoing times where we meet as a team together, and we have times where we're talking about different situations and how we can help with them. I think the biggest thing would be to really have that understanding that the coping mechanisms that families come to us with are ones that have gotten them through a lot. And they are coping mechanisms. They may be inappropriate. So when we're talking about different, when we're talking about substance abuse, some of the mental health issues that we see, as we all see in shelters, it's really talking about, this isn't someone that's coming to just, make your day miserable. It's not about that. It's not about us at all. It's about the people we're serving and how can we best help them. So we do lots of consultation between staff, and we have lots of consultation with the client in our shelter. We call them resident, with the resident themselves. So a lot of that, we're not making plans for people, we're making plans with people. And so if someone were to ever come, or even at the board level, we're talking about, well, what's the plan on that? Well, the plan wouldn't be something that we would create. It's not top down. The plan is something that very much involves the person that is going to have to take those next steps. Does that
Okay.
kind of answer your question, Heather?
Yeah, and I see another question, or another pair of questions that have just come up from Grace Scott that I think is really connected to that. So she says, we are one staffed per shift and have had to deal with drugged clients. Sometimes it is hard to calm the house down after these situations. Any ideas on how we can stay calm and deliver support that is needed?
Well, I would say the fact that you're even realizing you have to do that is the first step, right? We too are sometimes single shifted, and certainly at night single shifted. So we make sure we have things in place, so an on call, so someone can always call someone so they can feel that they're supported as well. Because remember, we talked about the staff being supported as well. And then getting back together as soon as possible once one of those things that happen that can just deregulate everybody in the house. So being aware of it is honestly number one. And then having that system in place to be able to get back together and debrief about it and get everybody again regulated as quickly as possible. Having those places in the house where maybe some of those things might happen, because we all know that we've had police or CMP meeting to come. So let's not do that in the main common area. Let's, as much as possible, because sometimes you can't do that, take that into another part of the house, or take the rest of people out to another part of the house, but having that time where you can debrief together. And it may not be at 1 o'clock in the morning, but hopefully that staff person can have some time to talk with someone that might be via phone on call, but then the next day have that opportunity to come back together and just help everybody get regulated and calm again, because it can be a place that is very, very, very busy.
Yeah.
Hope that helped.
Yeah, she says thank you. Do we have any other questions? Does everyone see where the question area is on the side? We've had a few questions come through, so I know it's working, which is great. It's always hard to know what everyone else is experiencing on a webcam, but I hope everyone seems to still be logged on. Most of the people that logged on are still there, so that's a good sign. It is 45 minutes in from the very beginning of the webinar, which is sort of when we were thinking about winding down. So I was wondering if, unless we get any questions that pop up, if we could have maybe a closing thought from Chris and Sherrie.
You go first, Chris.
Okay. I want people to understand that we're not done. This is an ongoing journey. As we are becoming more embedded, or we are embracing to a greater extent trauma-informed practices, I think we're all understanding that actually we have more work to do. And I don't think this is ever going to actually end. We obviously also have new board members who haven't received the trauma-informed practice, and it's our responsibility to make sure that they understand. And one of the things that we've done as a board is make sure that we schedule regular learning events so that we can make sure that all of our board members understand, why are we approaching certain things a certain way? Why do we use certain language when we're talking about our residents and the people that we're helping in the community, and so on. So from my perspective, those learning board meetings are every bit as important as the business meetings, which we schedule around the quarter. So that structure of board meetings, we actually have three. We have a business meeting, a strategic meeting, and then a learning meeting on a rotating cycle. And that is actually both evidence and a part of embedding trauma-informed principles into our board level management, if you like.
That's fantastic. I just had another question pop up. What would you say are the first steps for a board to take in being trauma-informed? And that's from Ingrid. What were your first steps?
I can talk about what our first steps was. We spent an entire board meeting, a long one as well, with someone that really understood trauma-informed practice. We brought somebody in to help us understand this, and obviously Sherrie was an important part of that training process, where we basically went through exactly the same steps as the staff did. So like the quilt exercise, or the paper quilt exercise, for example, there was a paper quilt on the wall that the staff had done, and then we followed up with the same thing. This isn't just a mental exercise, if you like. This isn't just we're going to be a trauma-informed board now. No, there is actually a serious learning process. It was absolutely necessary. We wouldn't have been where we are now if we hadn't had that initial, more formal training, I guess.
Yeah. Can I add a bit to that, Heather?
Absolutely.
Exactly that. There's that basic understanding of what trauma is and the impact of trauma and how it presents itself. That's a basic understanding. You really have to learn that. Otherwise, how are you going to understand that what that means when the women that we see and reacting in different ways? So that was an important part. We did work with an accredited trauma specialist. My first thought, and many people that have heard me before will have heard me say that I thought, let's just hire someone to come in, make us trauma informed. That does not work. So that is not going to work. And it may work initially, but there won't be the buy-in. So that I wanted to say. And the second thing, when you talk about what did you do first, I can speak of what we did at staff and board. So very first was that basic understanding of what trauma was. And this is an exercise. The second thing is the exercise that we did with staff. And I would love to do it with the board. And so maybe we'll do that with new board, because it is really important for new staff, new board members to understand why and what the journey was. Because, I mean, it's the same thing. You just plunk someone in. It doesn't mean they know it. So we did a physical sensory exercise where we started across the street from our physical building. And it took us 30 minutes to even get into the foyer, because we had the conversation about what looks really welcoming, because we didn't even use the trauma-informed words, because what are they really? What looks really welcoming by the outside of our shelter when we're standing across the street, and talking about that. We went into our foyer, a man trap type of thing with 2 locked doors. How does it feel being in here? So we talked about, like, what did we see? How did it feel? Could we change things? Is this welcoming? One of our one of the things that we had in that entrance area was a sign that said, "Hang your troubles at the door." And we all thought, that's a lovely saying, until the trauma specialist said, "Yeah, not so much." She said, "I can't hang my troubles at the door." So seeing that when I first walk in, I'm already triggered. So whoops. So that went down, and we'd look to put something else up. So it really was a walking through every part of the building, and I believe that staff continue to do it now. If you were to walk in and there might be, I don't know, something sitting in the main area, and people would say, "Oh, no, 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 that is not looking very welcoming," or that could potentially be a trigger. Are we identifying all the different cultures and backgrounds that we work with, and making sure that physical space is trauma informed? So that, to me, that's kind of one of the first things, probably the easiest thing, and probably the least expensive thing that anybody can do.
Yeah, and I see there's 2 more questions that have popped up. One is more of a comment. I really like the gratitude opening before meeting. I'm going to start that before our house meetings, and we'll suggest it to our ED for our staff meetings. So that's from Grace. And then what would you suggest we implement at a board level when we don't have the budget to hire a consultant or expert? I think that might be our last question, or maybe one more if somebody has something really urgent, really burning that's that they have left.
I can say something really, really quick, Chris, and then you say, I think it's just important to start wherever you can, because there are some things that don't cost money, and we're sharing a lot of this. So even looking at that tool that we looked at, and looking at those 7 focus areas, just starting to work that through, and doing just that, even that little exercise that I talked about, and the training, as Chris talked about, just helping people to understand what how pervasive trauma is.
There's lots of documentation out there about trauma-informed practices as well, and some of it is really useful, and some of it really isn't. But one of the things that the Rowan House board decided after saying we are going to be a trauma-informed organization in all aspects of what we do was also to be thought leaders in the domestic violence world, and we are very willing to reach out and help and share information and so on. So if you have questions that need answering, they don't have to be all in this webinar. We're very, very happy to receive emails or phone calls or whatever. And Sherrie, I hope your telephone is not going to be ringing off the hook for the next 3 weeks. but you know, we decided that we were going to share the knowledge and experience that we have gained over the last few years, because it's an important part of what we do. We decided as a board again that we are more than a shelter, that we are trying to change the conversation, we're trying to change our community, and helping other shelters get their trauma-informed practices in place is a part of changing that conversation, I think. So you're welcome to reach out to us and other trauma-informed organizations, obviously, to ask questions too.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah, and that ties into the whole purpose of the Open Doors project, which is to start building those connections, linking together the knowledge that shelters and transition houses have built on their own, and sort of cross-pollinating those together so that people can custom build an approach that works for them. And really having these conversations is a huge part of that, because it's emerging, it's an emerging approach, and everyone's sort of early on in the process of that. There's some that are a bit further ahead, there's some that are just starting, but we're all learning together, and it's all about sharing that learning. I see another, it looks like a comment here that I'll just share quickly. Oh, this is long. This is from Rose Schmidt. The Centre of Excellence in Women's Health is working with YWCA Toronto to further integrate trauma-informed practice through the whole association. It's a 4-year project funded by Public Health. Unfortunately for those interested, the project has just started, but at the end of the project, we'll create many resources that are transferable to other organizations. You can follow the project here. The Centre of Excellence of Women's Health is working with YWCA Toronto to further integrate trauma-informed practice through the whole association. And that's just a duplicate there. So you can follow the project here at bcce.bc.ca, or sorry, bccewh.bc.ca, bccewh.bc.ca. So thank you very much, Rose. That's a great resource. And opendoorsproject.ca also had some resources, and we'll try to put that link up there because it sounds like a great thing to share links on. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I hope it was informative. I hope it was helpful. We will share our PowerPoint, and I will add mine and Chris's contact information to that as well, and then I'll get it to Heather.
Fantastic. I'm so grateful to both of you for sharing your time, the lead up and the work that we did before this workshop and this webinar, and the time that you're sharing right now and your expertise. So this is what it's all about, and you were fantastic, and I look forward to following how things go with Rowan House, and hearing how everyone's response to the workshop afterwards. So thank you so much to both of you, and we'll be doing more webinars in the future. For anyone who enjoyed this webinar, we will be presenting it again in French in a few months, and then we're working on another series on pet inclusion and its impact on mental health for women in women's shelters and transition houses. So stay tuned for that as part of the Open Doors Project webinar series. Thank you so much.
Thank you.